what your expectations are from President Ramaphosa's plan that he might deliver tomorrow.
Okay, that's a nice question, because really what I want to see, and I think what every South African wants to see, is a vision and an economic plan that will deal decisively, one, with unemployment, two, with the lackluster growth of not just post-COVID, but also pre-COVID. We were unable to grow and see real structural reform in our economy. Three, I want to see structural transformation in our economy. And what do I mean by that? I mean that I want to see production and output coming from primary and your secondary sectors targeted to increase more than double so that we can deal with some of the issues that emanate from the type of growth path we have had. I think, four, in the main, how are we going to grow the economy? We need to be told what measures are going to be put in place, targeted interventions, and really what reviews need to be put in place and thoroughly redo things and throw out the things that haven't worked, and so that we are bold and decisive about building a new growth path for the country. Because what we've been doing in the last 25, even 50 years, I would want to go back further, has not really sufficiently incorporated the large mainstream of South Africans into the economy, has changed the dual economy that we see with the two economies, depending on whether you're in a rural area or township versus a town, or in an urban area with all the resources and services. So we really haven't systemically dealt with some of those historical inequalities, and we need to really propel growth and stimulus with different type of mechanisms and interventions. And this is what we propose in the alternative economic framework.
All right, so today I'm the president, and I've just appointed you now Minister of Finance and Economic Development. Tell me, give me advice. What must we do?
So firstly, what I propose is that there are necessary fundamentals that have to be put in place. If we are going to succeed as a country, we haven't had the right fundamentals in place. And in order for us to get everything correct, we must first come to an agreement that we haven't had the right fundamentals. So in order to do that, one, we must decisively craft an economic strategy with clear interventions and targets that are measurable. So whatever we implement, we must be able to prove what is it going to do in a year? What is it going to do in 2 years? What is it going to do directly in terms of 5 and 10 years? Impact on not just debt to GDP, Peter. It has to impact also on inequality, on growth. It has to impact investment outcomes. It has to impact how we grow structurally, primary, secondary sectors. It has to show how are we going to increase our revenue drive as a state so we can drive our development goals. Secondly, the second thing I would put in place is I'd have to do a high-level assessment and look at, and we've done that anyway already in the report, both industrial policy, having looked back 25 years. We've looked at the fiscus, we've looked at the type of programs, and we've made recommendations on the clustering of our institutions. We've looked at the programs and the inefficiencies in our programs and some of the market failures. You have to then redirect your still same resources. We spend 45 billion, for instance, in agriculture on 3 out of 8 programs. The state has significant resources. We spend a lot of resources on manufacturing incentives across auto sector, across different subsectors, but they're not yielding results because we are deindustrializing. We're losing jobs in the auto sector. This is what the evidence is telling us. Therefore, it means that the mechanisms we're employing are not satisfactory. I'd also argue that we need to reform our value chains and distribution channels. A case in point, Peter, is the retail value chain, the supermarket value chain is controlled by 3 retail chains which are oligopolistic in nature, and these type of structures hinder and have barriers to entry to have an inclusive and shared economy. Household goods, things that we all eat and consume, are controlled by a few. Therefore, they control the price, they control the competitiveness, and they control the supply chain of all these goods and services that are produced and promoted and sold through their chains. Therefore, we do case studies in that report showing some of the dominance issues and how they inhibit entry of SMMEs, local champions, into these value chains.
How do you break these oligopolies down, though?
It's the Competition Act. You need to look at the definition of dominance. Currently, dominance is defined as a company that has more than 45% market share. But if you look at it from an aggregate perspective, in other countries, this is not a normal phenomena. 3 companies in South Africa, I want to break it down in retail. 3 companies control 80% plus, 85% plus of our market share. If you add the 2 more, they control 96%. And we all know the retail chains that we all buy food from. This is not a normal thing. You break it by changing the Dominance Act in the Competition Act. You also have to have progressive supply chain measures that are regulated, that have not got as much certification, that do not have exclusionary inbuilt principles in them that enable access and enable new entrants. So there are various things that we recommend that can be done there. And I think it's not just in the retail and value and supermarket value chain, I must stress. 22 subsectors we have analyzed, and we have seen that they have high concentration index or dominance of up to 3 to 5 companies. This means that across the subsectors in South Africa, you have high level of ownership by very few companies. And these are the mechanisms that need to be reviewed. If you are encouraging SMMEs, if you're encouraging local participation, but you have these oligopolies, and oligopolies are really managed, and if you look at economic theory, there's massive barrier to entry. They can control prices, and they have price wars and behave like cartels to deal with any competition that comes in, and they exclude them. Therefore, it's not only to the detriment of the entrant who is a supplier, but also to the consumer in terms of prices, in terms of options, in terms of the quality of goods. So these oligopolies need to be reviewed and looked at across the subsectors. And I'm not picking on them because they're not necessarily the only ones, but I think it's a structural flaw that has been overlooked for various years in the country. It's not the only thing I do, but I think amongst others, we do recommend 6 fundamentals that need to be implemented. And then you have 7 strategic interventions that you can implement immediately.
All right. So over the years, one of the things that we've seen as the public is we hear great speeches, great policies, great plans, but something happens in terms of implementation. And so as great as your plan is, how do we make it work? How do the implementers actually get the job done?
I think one of the severe problems we have had is the level of coordination across entities of the state. I know this has been said many times. I know a lot of people talk about coordination, but this is a real thing. It mitigates the real effect of outcomes. The value chain of the state really relies on the ability of the implementing arm of the state to see through what has been envisioned and put together in the policy-making space. And it must run right through to local government. And I think the failure is in that there is very little coordination. And I'll go to a case in point. If we are saying that we are driving industrialization as a case in point, we should be, as a country, looking at all of the public procurement, and this has been spoken about many a time, linked to the ability to optimize the public goods and the use of our public resources and public procurement to drive industrialization, to drive localization. But what happens? Look at what happened with COVID. All the money is used to import goods. Most of the money subject to if you look at and assess a lot of the reports that are coming out, there was no real localization. We didn't really target our pharmaceuticals, our chemical sector, and those value chains upstream and downstream in the subsectors, even now in COVID, to produce all of this PPE equipment that is now under scrutiny. Why is it that even in time of crises, when our own industries are in need of fiscal stimulus, we cannot redirect? And that's a problem with coordination. And that's a problem also of will in terms of using the state fiscus to actually ensure that our industries are resuscitated, like most countries are doing right now. And so I think if we are unable to coordinate DFIs, channel your local procurement, channel your trade policies, it isn't just going to happen. It requires entities and agencies of the state to work together. So your NEFs, your DBSAs, your IDCs, they need to collaborate. Your DTI incentives packages, your special economic zones, IDZs, they very much sometimes seem to be disjointed, and so you find that there's very little synergy amongst them, and that limits
We're running out of
time.
We're running out of time, but there's one question I must ask you, and it's all very well to create an enabling environment, but you've got to incentivize people, A, to release funds from their balance sheets, and also for direct investment to come. How do we do that?
So we focus a lot as a country on foreign direct investment or foreign direct inflows. I know in the last financial year, we had about 518 or 519 billion coming in terms of FDI. This is much higher than what was previously reported from the downward trajectory of the previous year. However, this is not the only way of resource mobilization. We always want to look at external companies, external investors. South Africa is sitting on a 1.4 trillion cash hoarding in terms of cash reserves from the top 50 JSE listed firms. They are not reinvesting into the economy. So how is it that we expect foreigners to come and invest when our own companies are hoarding cash to the level of 1.4 trillion. This is what's happening now. Gross fixed capital formation is not at the level it should be. It's at 17.9%. It should be at much higher levels if we're trying to drive investment into machinery, equipment, land, reinvesting that money into South Africa and not repatriating it. We ourselves need to use our domestic resources wisely and invest into productive sectors so that we can kickstart our economy and make sure that we stimulate economic activity. I won't start talking about pension funds. We won't stop. But pension funds have been used creatively in various countries as well to reuse domestic resources to drive economic growth, to drive infrastructure development. And we don't do this. We're too scared. And I think we need innovation in this country. And I think we need to do what hasn't been done before to get different outcomes. But if we do what's always been done, we surely will expect the same outcomes.
Dr. Nthabiseng, Moleko, I hope that Ibrahim Patel and Tito Mboweni get your report and advise the President accordingly. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. All right, that's Dr. Nthabiseng Moleko, who's is a development economist at the University of Stellenbosch Business School, and they've come out with a plan. Get it, read it, and see if it might work.